Hello, this is Doug Leslie, and you're on the pre-proposal teleconference call for RFP number 2017-03 as for the Multisourcing Service Integrator services. So welcome. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate your time, and we recognize the resources that are being brought to bear here, and we appreciate it. So, again, this is the pre-proposal teleconference. Hopefully you are on the web conference as well and can see the PowerPoint presentation that we're broadcasting now. So, again, my name is Doug Leslie. I am the VITA Supply Chain Management single point of contact and sourcing lead for this request for proposals. And assisting us, and a couple guys that will be speaking as well on the call today, are Tim Rickman and Alejandro Gandara from Integra Supply. And they'll be adding some details later on in the discussion. So, you want to advance that? Tim.
Yep, the slides should be advancing shortly. Good afternoon, this is Tim Rickman from Integra Supply. I'll be helping Doug with this this process as well, and as he mentioned, my colleague Alejandro will be joining us to talk about some of the finance documents shortly. This is we'll talk through the agenda here as we get started. We'll talk some about the background, why we're here, the program overview, some of the goals, how we're addressing it over 3 waves, and of course their slides format and timing, and then we'll dive into the documents a little bit. We also want you to know, it's very important that this conference is for informational purposes only. We hope it's valuable for you toward that end. We realize that it's a challenge addressing a bunch of documents that sort of get passed back and forth over a wall. And so we wanted to have this session to describe things verbally to you and add the context. But we recognize that if we actually make a mistake, hopefully we won't, but if we do, if something we say here contradicts something that's written in one of the documents, we hope that you'll, first of all, ask us about that if you notice it. But in any case, the documents posted publicly supersede anything that's stated here. We also want you to be aware that this conference is being recorded. We've already hit record on it. It will be posted on YouTube later, provided we don't have any technical issues with it. And that will be for you to distribute further within your organizations for anybody who may have missed this call. We'll also be posting the attendee list in EVA. That'll be both the registrants and the actual attendees logged into the webinar. So let's jump into some of the background as to why we're here. Those of you who've been following along VITA for some time or engaged in earlier procurements are probably well aware of this, but we thought it's worthwhile to describe it again, add some context for how it fits within our current status. So as you all know, Virginia's been a leading state in centralization and consolidation of IT services, and that's been done primarily through the comprehensive infrastructure agreement signed about 10 years ago with Northrop Grumman. Although it's been largely successful in achieving its goals, it really is time for a change, and there's a couple of aspects of that. One is, of course, it's a long contract, as I say, going on 10 years, and it's been extended 3 more, so they've exercised all the extension options, and so therefore something else needs to come in to replace it. But as or more importantly, as VITA has considered things over the last year, considered its past accomplishments and where it needs to turn toward the future, there's very much a realization that the existing agreement was built around enterprise goals of standardization and consolidation and the like, and any future model needs to better address the agency needs. So it needs to we still need to enjoy the benefits of standardization and security and that sort of thing at an enterprise level, but we need to better address the needs for customization and flexibility and choice at the agency level. And so the future sourcing ecosystem is built around that. Also, we want to point out that, and we want suppliers to be well aware that the Commonwealth is very well to establish the new model. And first is partly because of the accomplishments within the CIA to standardize and centralize. You're not walking into an environment full of shadow IT at all the agencies or whatever. Basically, much of the services are consolidated. A significant portion is being reported upon, is in the CMDB and that sort of thing. So you're walking in and taking over an environment that is fairly consistent, or at least well understood, broadly speaking. But then second, and maybe more importantly, over the last year, VITA has done a lot of work through its sourcing strategy program to engage stakeholders. So include customers, interview customers about what they want in their future, and allow them to influence their future. They work with the executive branch and legislative branch and things like the steering committees to help influence and guide the future. And so they've built this coalition of stakeholders to support the change program, and that means that basically they've built a train, put it on the tracks, and it's full steam ahead. So incoming suppliers can feel confident that VITA has a pretty good sense where it's going, and it's on the tracks to get there. Next, we thought it would be worthwhile to talk a little bit further about the 3 waves of the sourcing program to replace the CIA services. So of course we're in wave 2 here, but it started within wave 1. And wave 1 was extracting messaging and mainframe services out of the existing agreement. From a procurement perspective, those are now behind us. They've been accomplished. So messaging was awarded to Tempus Nova. Mainframe was awarded to Hewlett-Packard. And those were chosen for wave 1 because, for a couple of reasons. They were a little bit more easily severable. They were a little bit easier to procure, a little quicker to procure, and also they were just of greater interest internally for change for various reasons. But wave 2 is very much where the meat of the new model happens. It's the establishment of the foundation for the future state sourcing environment, and what we often call a platform. And so that's very much based on the MSI and this procurement, but it also includes some very important procurements that fit closely and need to integrate closely with the MSI. So server, storage, data center, and security. So it includes all of these things. There was a bigger runway leading up to it internally, more work on scoping and strategy toward wave 2, and of course it's a longer procurement timeline than wave 1 was. But it also includes this element of an RFP and an RFI. So as you've probably seen, on Thursday we released an RFP for MSI and an RFI for the other services, which I'll call service tower suppliers, so the various tower services. And I want to talk a little bit about that and the reasoning for that, or how that works. Basically, within wave 2, the teams have decided that it would make most sense from a sequencing perspective to sign the MSI contract before the other contracts, to stagger it in that way. And that will allow the MSI to be in place and begin its transition while the other providers are still coming in, while we're still refining the solutions with the other providers. And so those providers will have a better sense of what they're going to plug into. And so what that allows from a procurement perspective as we stage things is we engage with the market on the same day with both sets of procurements, but we sign at a different date. So in the case of the MSI, we're working intently on the RFP. In the case of the other tower suppliers, we're engaging the market now in the form of an RFI, which includes a draft of our RFP documents that if we were to hypothetically release an RFP today for the tower services, it would look substantially like what's in that RFI. But the RFI allows us to talk with the market and let them comment on the documents. We've also asked some specific questions within it. But probably thematically throughout the RFI, what we're really trying to get at is what are the best ways to kind of demarc scope between the various service tower suppliers within wave 2. The server, storage, data center, security all go together. Should they be split in some fashion? These are some of the key questions we're trying to address and just get a better perspective on the marketplace as we finalize the documents that will actually become part of the RFP to be released around the end of the year. So that's kind of the difference between the RFP and the RFI. Then we've got wave 3, which will happen after wave 2 is done, as we predict it right now, for any remaining services. And so currently that looks like it's network, data, WAN and LAN at the user end, voice, and then user services. So next I'll start diving into what's actually in some of the RFP documents. I wanted to start with the Infrastructure Services Program goals, and then we'll talk about the RFP goals themselves. So you'll hear this phrase, the IT Infrastructure Services Program, abbreviated as IT-ISP, and it's got a set of goals that VITA is trying to accomplish with its future ecosystem. And that's different from any one procurement. Any one procurement is intended to support these program goals. And so the first one is maintain and improve service quality. We've got a certain level of quality and reliability and security today, and we think of that as the baseline. We obviously don't want things to degrade, but we certainly want things to improve beyond this baseline. So that's number one, maintain and improve. Second is ensure cost competitiveness both now and in the future. That's really about two things. One is, of course, making sure we have good competitive market rates, in sort of simple form, with good market rates. And then second, it's that agencies have a little bit more choice and control over their future from a cost perspective. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, but rather throughout our services where possible, we have tiers of offerings or various options that allow agencies to have a little more control over their future from a cost and services perspective. And then finally, and this is to a great extent where the MSI comes in, is create a platform view of service delivery that is highly visible and accountable. And so this, the whole framework is intended to create more visibility of the consumption, of the services, of the costs, of the supplier responsiveness and performance. It establishes a new governance model that promotes, encourages, really is driven by stakeholder engagement in many ways, all intended to improve the balance of agency and enterprise needs. So with that, we get into the MSI goals, the specific goals of this particular procurement. I won't read each of these verbatim here, but I'll say that there's a couple of things within it. The MSI is intended to provide coordination and integration across the multiple suppliers in the environment. And it's more than a program management role of writing processes and making sure that others follow them. We always want to pull the MSI into the tent with the other suppliers. And so they provide the service desk, they provide incident management, they play a role in certain key functions within the ecosystem. So in addition to kind of coordinating and integrating, they're also doing certain things that allow them to be within the tent. The other aspect is it's based on ITIL framework. The team has taken great care to make sure that the requirements of the MSI align as closely as possible with the standard ITIL framework. And I've only added or removed things or adjusted things where it needed to fit a little bit more tightly with VITA and the way the Commonwealth operates. It also is, of course, replacing the cross-functional services within the CIA. It's not intended to fundamentally add a bunch of new stuff, but replace and improve upon what's existing within the cross-functional tower and sits within some of the individual towers within the CIA. And the MSI plays a role in supporting relational governance and implementing operational governance, concepts which are described further in our governance-related exhibits in Exhibit 1. So next we'll get a little bit deeper into the weeds and what needs to happen in terms of response format and timing. This, of course, is in the RFP instructions, but we thought it'd be worthwhile to explain it. Here's what the Commonwealth needs. They need a single hard copy of the whole proposal, so a written copy of the whole proposal, and then 3 electronic copies. Now, we use these terms sometimes interchangeably. I'll try to use the word disk, but it can be CD-ROM or it can be USB drives. But we need 3 copies of the proposal in the split that I'm about to describe electronically. So disk 1, you can think of as the solution proposal. It's all of the documents except anything related to pricing. Disk 2 is all the pricing and financial documents. So that's the response related to the Exhibit 4 suite. The distinction, as you probably realize, is that we want to keep our internal solution and finance team separate in the early phases of our process so that our solution folks can be oriented directly without distraction on the solution response. And our finance folks can do the detailed analysis of the business case. Disk 3 is the entire proposal, both solution and price. So all of the documents, but with any proprietary information redacted. Now we'll talk in a few minutes, Doug will talk a little further about what that really means. But But basically, if you believe under Virginia statute that any particular information of yours that you submit is proprietary and should not be released in the event of a FOIA request, then you should provide a redacted copy of that proposal within Disc 3. Now, additional guidance regarding the submission formats is within Section 3 of the RFP Instructions, and also within the Administrative Appendix A, the Table of Documents, which is sort of a glossary for the whole RFP. And I'm going to talk through that in a few minutes. And then finally, the due date and time. This is very important. It's 4 p.m. Eastern Time on November 16th. We need to have a cutoff at some point. That is the cutoff. Unfortunately, it cannot be a second or a minute later, and we've got sad stories of suppliers running across the parking lot after 4 o'clock. We don't want that to happen to you. We do want your proposal, but if it is beyond 4 o'clock, we will not be able to accept it. So please make sure you submit it in due time to meet that deadline. Also, the last day to submit questions is November 9th, a week in advance, and that's just to make sure that we have a couple of days to get back with you while you're still finalizing your proposal. So next we're going to begin a walkthrough of some of the documents. And here's where I'll hand it back and forth to Doug and to Alejandro as we talk through certain pieces. But first I'll put up on the screen the RFP instructions. So here,
right.
Go ahead, Doug. Yep, I'll begin scrolling.
Thanks, Tim. All right, so looking at the RFP instructions document, I've got the usual formalities of non-discrimination and the administrative information on the cover page there. I guess I'll echo what Tim said to say you got to have proposals here by 4 o'clock on the 16th, because if a second late, then we can't accept them, which is always a heartbreaker when somebody shows up at 4 o'clock and 40 seconds or 4:01. The door of the building locks automatically at 4, so if you're running here and you don't get in that door by 4, we won't accept it. So, and another critical item here is identifying myself, Doug Leslie, as a single point of contact. I would urge you not to communicate with anybody else about the RFP or your response to it. I will find the right people to answer any questions you have, but it's key that only communicate with me on anything related to this stuff through the entire process.
Doug, I might add to that. We tell our folks internally the same thing. So if anybody, whether they be an internal stakeholder, who asks someone on one of our procurement teams how things are going, or a supplier or somebody else in the marketplace, we say we can't talk about that. We need to go back through Doug. And it's very, very important because we all want to maintain the integrity of the procurement. It's very critical for VITA. It's critical for the suppliers. You're interested in it. And of course, it's a very high-profile procurement, so we want it to be done as cleanly as possible.
Sure, and really it's to all suppliers' benefit, because you really need to get one consistent source of information. I think that's helpful for everybody. So, moving on, I'm not going to sit here and read the document. You got Section 2 as your instructions and things. This document is really kind of your roadmap to the process and kind of how to participate in the process, how to respond, and along with this table of documents that Tim's going to walk us through in a little bit. You'll see, let me point out, for instance, in Section F there, authorized to transact business in the Commonwealth. There's a form that you've got to fill out, complete, and submit with your proposal. Moving along, and scroll there. So let's talk about Section J, proprietary information. So it's key that if you have proprietary information trade secrets that you do not want to be shared, because this, this whole process is subject to the Virginia Public Procurement Act as well as the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And, when this whole process is done, basically everything will be subject to Freedom of Information Act requests, and, will be available to the public. So if there's anything that you legitimately is proprietary trade secret, you've got to follow this process, including the form Appendix E that explains or that gives you an opportunity to identify the specific information you have that's proprietary. We can't accept, the idea of an entire proposal being proprietary or the pricing being proprietary. You have to specifically identify, citing the appropriate law, which is given here, specific things that are proprietary, and that form, Appendix E, actually requires that you, explain why it's proprietary. But if you do that and then submit that Disc 3, again, with your entire proposal, but with proprietary information that you've identified in Appendix E redacted, the purpose of this is so when we do get a request from somebody to examine a proposal, it's not up to VITA to try to interpret exactly which stuff you've said is proprietary and do the redactions. This is your opportunity to do that, again, consistent with Appendix E, so that when we get a request, we can just give them a copy of the one you gave us, and it's correct. So looking at K, proposal protocol, there it gives you, the explanation of the timing, gives you the, explains what Tim was just talking about with regard to the discs and the hard copy. Pointing out here that we will accept like a USB thumb drive as opposed to a disk. Just be subject to scanning by our security folks, so be aware of that. It's important when you submit them that you label them as described here, because the people that read here, that's their signal to them that this thing is very time sensitive and that it needs to immediately be delivered to me. Again, I am the single point of contact, and all inquiries concerning the RFP should be emailed to me with that subject line pointed out in section L. Tim talked about the deadline, 5 business days before the due date. We will be posting, and in fact I've already posted a handful of questions and our answers to them that we've received so far, and I will continue to do that on a regular basis, probably several times a week, if not virtually every day, as we receive and answer questions. Let's see. Evaluation process, again, says right there, late proposals will not be considered. We always harp on that, but that's so important. But the process is described there. It's key that you're responsive. If we make any requests for clarification or additional information, it's critical that you're responsive and engaged should we decide to enter into negotiations. It's critical that you keep your eye on EVA, the posting in EVA, because again, I'm posting questions and answers. If we should have to amend the RFP for some reason, tweak requirements, or we find an error that we think needs to be corrected or anything, those changes, any such changes would be done by a written amendment to the RFP, which would be posted in EVA. So it's critical you keep your eye on that posting, and that you, especially, if you're submitting a proposal, shortly before you submit the proposal, make one last check in case there are any last-minute changes. Of course, you have to be registered in EVA as well before any award can be made.
Well, yeah, and I think the key point, Doug, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's by date of award. they need to be registered.
Yeah.
So you don't need to be registered to submit, but to be awarded, ultimately you need to be registered.
Yep.
Okay.
There's probably most of you are aware of the excluded parties list as well, because we have a lot of federal funds that get used for pretty much anything you can think of, including IT infrastructure here. You've got to be eligible to receive federal funds. So if you're on one of those excluded parties lists, clear that up. So talk about the proposal format. There's a table there, Table A in Section 3, that kind of describes how we're asking you to respond and where to put the responses. I'm not going to read that word for word, except to reiterate that Disc 2 should have all the pricing related information. Disc 1 should not.
And I think mostly these are self-explanatory here, but we've got a couple of formats which you'll see in the table of documents for response. And we'll explain those when we walk through that. Doug, I guess I'll just mention here, we've got a whole set of program overview documents or environment overview documents. We released Appendix A or posted that publicly. The remainder are available via request. It was only because we knew that they would be available and sort of FOIA-able, so to speak, but we didn't want to make them Googleable, so to speak. So those are available if you email Doug. There's other documents.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I think, Doug, the remainder of the sections really reference other documents. So the functional and technical requirements are described in Exhibit 2. We've got an Appendix B for the supplier profile, which we'll show in a minute. Supplier procurement subcontracting plan. This is a document which we'll put on the screen, but it shows the the supplier describes its subcontractors, whether or not they include small businesses or SWAM businesses. And then a reminder of how to submit pricing information. And finally, the standard agreement response form, which we'll talk about in a minute as well. I think you may as well point out here that all of the documents associated with the RFP have been released or are requestable, except for the MSA. And the MSA is intended to be released by our RFP amendment on Friday, this coming Friday the 7th, is the plan for that release.
Yep, that will of course be posted in EVA. So let me point out, notice that we referenced the EULA addendum, license agreement addendum, should there be a need for us to execute a license for any software that's being brought. And that's actually posted with the RFP. I think we say in here somewhere that you have to contact me for that, but it's out there. So it's not necessary to contact me.
Yep. Okay. And we'll walk through that document list. I'm going to put one thing. I'm going to backtrack just briefly for a second. Back in Section 3B, where we talk about the response format, it says template table or NA, and in fact, what you'll see in a couple of the documents, I think it's 5 documents, they're marked template in our table of documents, but in fact, there's a table at the beginning of it, and so that's really what we mean there. So, like the MSA is going to have a table at the front of it. Exhibit 3, 4, and 5 also have a table at the front of it. So where you have commentary within those documents, we're asking you to provide it within that table at the front end. But we've provided them to you. We've called them template because they're sort of a template that includes a table. So with that, why don't I'll kind of bounce through the the table of documents here. So this is a list of all of the documents associated with the RFP or the final contract as we imagine it today. And so in some cases, documents have been released with the RFP. In some cases, documents we anticipate might be part of the contract but weren't necessary for the RFP, and where we know that that might be indicated. But the first set is the administrative set, and these either describe the RFP, like the instructions or the table of documents, or they are required for RFP submission, like these other administrative documents, such as the supplier profile or authorization to transact business and that sort of thing. So those are marked template, and they're marked CD1. And we'll open a couple of those here to show them to you in a minute. The environment overview appendices I've described are intended to give suppliers more of a glimpse of the environment. They're not intended to be contract documents. They're intended to be kind of due diligence reference information. Some things are marked reserved only because we've created a giant tracking list internally for all of the documents we might make available over the courses of waves 1, 2, and 3. And some of those aren't yet part of wave 2, and so they are just marked as reserved for now. Hope that's not confusing, but that's because we've got a larger list internally that will be developed in time. But these that are marked available are available, and some of you have already begun asking Doug for them. Please do that if you want them. Then, as we move on past, there's a number of those. But then we get into the contract documents themselves, so those associated with the, really with the Master Services Agreement and legal terms and conditions. So the MSA, as I mentioned, will be released. We anticipate October 7th, this coming Friday. It will be a template with the table in the beginning of it. These other attachments associated with it, we're not asking for a specific response right now, but they may become part of the agreement. As Doug mentioned, the LAA, for example, statement of work template, which may be used to execute statements of work in the future, or change orders, or things like that. There may be other documents to be added later, maybe a HIPAA business associate agreement, for example, but these are certain things that we recognize now. Then we've got the set of exhibits 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I'm going to, before I jump into those, I'm going to go back to the slide for a second to provide some context on the exhibits. So the meat of the contract, I mean, maybe you could say the meat of the contract is the MSA, but the language around what the supplier will really do day in, day out, and the quality levels they'll perform at, and the pricing is within one of these 5 exhibits. And we try and structure it that way for simplicity, because there are many contract documents. And so we always say that any contract should have at least 3 parts. So one is a description of services. What am I buying? The next is the quality level, so the reporting and service levels in this case. What is the quality level at which I'm buying it? And then the pricing and financial provisions. What is the price I'm paying for the services, or when will I pay? And so those are exhibits 2, 3, and 4. But in a long-term managed services agreement, where we expect to manage a relationship over a long time and change over time, we need to talk about governance and change, and that's exhibit 1, the integrated services platform. And that talks about how we integrate with other suppliers. And then 5 is the personnel and human resources provision. So that's anything related to people and HR, key personnel, and that sort of thing. So with that kind of framing, I'll jump back to the document list. The whole Exhibit 1 set is included within the RFP. They're NA in terms of response specifically, but you do have an opportunity to respond to these later, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But the Integrated Services Platform document describes the overview of this program of the multi-sourcing ecosystem. 1.1 is the definitions used throughout this agreement and potentially used in other agreements that we would integrate with. We've got the governance framework, so the various forums and that sort of thing that VITA anticipates, and we're looking for your commentary on that actually. The service management manual outline, that'll be the enterprise binder of processes and data and that sort of thing that's used across the environment. And the operating level agreement outline, so which frames up the integration mechanisms between suppliers. So all of Exhibit 1. Exhibit 2 is description of services and solution. I'll open a couple of these documents in a minute. But 2.1 is the very lengthy document that describes what we expect the MSI to do. And you have an ability to indicate yes or no, which things are you able to do as part of your, not really just able to do, but which things are you going to do as part of your solution. 2.3, and there are 2 documents within 2.3, this is for you to describe your solution back. So it's your solution document that describes how you're going to accomplish the things indicated in 2.1. And then we've got a separate document that goes along with it for your solution related to integration and governance. And so whereas 2.3.1 as an outline follows closely Exhibit 2.1, 2.3.2 follows the Exhibit 1 set. So here the MSI is able to tell us, you know, any commentary regarding the governance framework, how they would support integration, and that sort of thing. 2.4 is the implementation plan. It's a Word document. I often like to describe it a bit like a project charter type document that describes an overview of who's doing what, kind of risk mitigation and that sort of thing. And then the implementation milestones is an Excel table where you populate, you know, if you were to imagine you had a 1,000-row Microsoft project plan or something somewhere, you know, what are sort of the 50 key events along that plan that we would describe as key implementation milestones, and this allows you to document those, which allows our internal team to better understand various suppliers' implementation plans and timing. The transition out plan is a document that's used to describe how we would extricate from your services at the end of an agreement, and we like that to be developed in the early phase, actually completed ultimately before commencement, and then updated periodically, and then of course updated again at expiration of the agreement, so that we're more ready, all of us, to kind of disentangle or transition out at that point in time. Current and planned projects describes things that are underway in the environment, so that you have a sense of the change that's going on, and that you're aware of what you know, what you'll need to take on in the future. This one we've made available on request rather than posted publicly, so it kind of stands aside the others. The site list shows our own site, and it also includes a tab, it's important you recognize this, to populate the sites where you're providing services from. Then we get into reporting and service level management. This one again has Exhibit 3 describes our overall methodology, but it has a table at the beginning that allows you to comment on it. You know, not redline it sort of directly or change it or whatever, but to comment on it. 3.1 is our service level matrix that shows our sort of Excel version of the matrix that shows the various metrics that we have. 3.2 is the definitions, and here's where you would describe how you're going to measure some of the metrics and provide further commentary on them. Critical deliverables and reports are provided, customer satisfaction are provided for reference. You're welcome to comment on them within the Exhibit 3 table if you'd like, but these are items, critical deliverables, we'll work on more later. This provides a glimpse of what we see or we anticipate now. Reports provides a glimpse of what we expect in terms of reporting, but we also recognize that will change. And customer satisfaction, really our customer experience program, again, describes a glimpse of what we think it will be, but we are going to look for you to help us build that. Pricing and financial provisions, Exhibit 4 talks about the you know, the methodology, the terms and conditions associated with pricing, and it has a table at the front of it for you to comment on it. Then, of course, we've got our pricing templates themselves that you can respond to. Of course, you fill out your pricing. A lot of these others are then provided for reference. The form of invoice, the base case, that describes what we anticipate now. Exhibit 5, finally, as I'm closing it out here, the personnel and human resources provision. Again, it's got a table at the front of it for you to provide commentary. 5.1 allows you to list some of your key personnel. We've named some of those titles already that we anticipate would be key personnel, and therefore have kind of a little bit more permission and control over those individuals, or influence over those individuals. And then the personnel projection matrix, which allows you to indicate your staff counts by function and location by month throughout the term of the agreement. As I see it's going on 2:40 p.m., so I think we'll highlight just a couple of the documents out of this list. So first I'll ask Doug, of these administrative appendices, are there one or two we'd like to open and talk through?
Yeah, I guess the most, I would say the standard agreement response. Let's take a look at that.
Okay, I'll open that now. And the standard agreement response is something that just goes along with the RFP. It's really an acknowledgement form for you to confirm back, quite clearly that you agree with certain key provisions of the RFP, and ultimately that your response submitted, is your full and complete response. But let's look at a couple of the key fields within it. Oh, sorry. So, so this is what I mean. Do you agree that certain sections, your responses to 5, 7, and 8 of the RFP, and that's within the RFP instructions, which really references other documents, will become part of the contract? So the way we look at your response is that if, for whatever reason, you were to submit it, and we looked at it, you've made certain changes or adjustments, you've described your solution and price, and we looked at it, we scored it 5s across the board, and we thought it was amazing, and there were no other responses, that at least from your perspective, it's ready to be signed as soon as you submit it, in effect. So that you need to agree with everything you have submitted. In other words, you shouldn't walk back later. There is one exception with respect to liability provisions under Virginia statute, but that'll be described in the MSA. And so many of these questions kind of reinforce that. Doug, is there anything else you want to highlight out of this?
That was really the main point I was going to make. But the bottom line is, this and those other appendices you pointed out in that list are all things that need to be completed and submitted with the proposal. Yeah,
I'll just mention one other, the last administrative appendix called Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. That's the formal name of the document, but that doesn't make it voluntary. So please don't be confused by that. That's just what the document happens to be called within the COM law. I'll just open a couple of the Exhibit 2 related documents so that you can get a sense of what those are. 2.1 is the description of services for the MSI. What you'll see within this is it's a very lengthy document. The team has spent a significant amount of time trying to get its requirements correct. Here you are able, there's instructions at the beginning, but for each requirement, you're to indicate in every kind of white space, yes or no, that your solution covers that requirement, yes or no. If it's a no, we want you to kind of explain it here to the right. And if maybe you can adjust the language a little bit and then it would be a yes, you can let us know that. But otherwise, for all the yeses, we're not looking for you to kind of respond to each requirement within this table in terms of describing how you'll do it. Rather, we've created the solution document that parallels this document, Exhibit 2.3.1, which is a template with the identical table of contents where you can document your solution in narrative. And you can include charts and all that sort of thing to help us understand it. But this makes it simple for our evaluators to kind of understand the sections that you're responding to. Also allows us to dive into the solution and see the forest and not just the trees, so to speak. We've also got the implementation plan document and milestones for you to populate, sites list for you to populate. I won't open each of those right now because I think we should jump into some of the pricing forms. So Alejandro, I think I would open Exhibit 4.1, and you can guide me through the things you want to share with the team here.
That works. Actually, Tim, can we start with 4.0? I just want to look at the table of contents to point out a couple of key items, then we can roll to 4.1. I realize we want to reserve approximately about 10 minutes for Q&A, so we'll touch base on a few key items and then be on our way to that. Good afternoon, all. This is Alejandro Gundar. I'm supporting the Commonwealth in this RFP. One of the things that I want to just touch base on, Tim said 4.1 is a key document, 4.0 is a key document. Those are the two documents we'll likely be spending the most time on, or you will be spending the most time on as a supplier. This first one, again, has the terms and conditions, describes the methodology behind the charging mechanisms that we've included. It talks a little bit about chargeback, how we want to handle that. In particular, we have an existing chargeback system, invoicing system, that we'd like to explore whether or not we want to keep it in place or replace it. And so I pay particular attention to that particular section, along with Exhibit 4.4 for the requirements around invoicing, chargeback systems, etc. A couple of other key provisions here. ECA inflation should not be baked into pricing, but there's a mechanism described there in Section 10 that adjusts the charges periodically to account for inflation. And then Section 14 is a section that touches on termination fees. That particular section describes the different types of termination fees that exist, how those are calculated. And then now we'll jump to Exhibit 4.1, and there's a section in there that has dollar amounts to be filled in by supplier, which act as caps to ultimately cap each of those termination fees should the Commonwealth ever exercise the option to end the agreement early. So now we're looking at 4.1. This is, of course, the form that the supplier will fill in to provide us their pricing. We have a couple of sections here. Base charges is the first tab. That'll be where suppliers should populate all of their charges for the services at the resource baseline level. So all the items there. You can see we have the two option years, years 6 and 7. We want to see pricing for those, but again, those are optional, not part of the initial term. We can jump to the Arc tab, which is tab 2. Again, these are all the resource unit categories that exist within our proposed structure. One thing I'd also like to highlight is we want to understand the underlying economics of the solutions that are brought forth by suppliers. These are a set of arguments that we put forth. We think that are relatively good representations of what cost drivers are. We encourage suppliers to really think through whether or not these are the appropriate resource unit categories, et cetera. You must respond to these, but if you have alternative structures, we're very much looking forward to thinking through this, seeing what makes sense for the Commonwealth. A couple of other key tabs here. And if you just scroll over to the termination section. Yeah, this is often a little bit cumbersome to understand, but it's quite simple. We have a set of categories, termination fees, that again, Exhibit 4.0 describes how each of those fees are calculated, and the supplier will populate this table to tell us what the caps for each of those particular categories are. In any event of termination, we'll pay the calculation or the cap, whichever is lower. If you look at the milestone charges tab, this is the tab in which we want to see what each of the milestones that the supplier proposes as payment milestones to be listed. Of course, it's laid out by contract year. There's a set of milestones overall. A subsection of those are going to be payment milestones, and the supplier should list payment milestones here and the corresponding dollar amount tied to those particular milestones. And finally, I just want to point out the fact that there is an assumptions tab at the end for the supplier to list any assumptions related to pricing or any assumptions that weren't addressed anywhere else in the agreement. We encourage supplier to make sure that any assumption can be first addressed somewhere, either in the solution document, in Exhibit 4.0, and if not, then the assumption must be documented here so we understand exactly what the supplier position is. I think those are the key highlights of Exhibit 4.0 and 4.1. Tim, if we have a little bit more time, I can just walk through the rest of the exhibits briefly, or we can go to the Q&A section.
Let's hold on that and maybe come back to it. There's at least one other thing to talk about, Alejandro, that's going to relate to pricing. The Commonwealth, if you've been able to dive into the Exhibit 2.1 requirements, you may have seen this already. But the Commonwealth is expressing a preference for a service desk within the region of Southwest Virginia. And this is described more fully in Section 6 of Exhibit 2.1. Currently, the Level 1 service desk is located there. And I won't repeat any of the language indicated within that section, but I'll encourage you to take a look at it. Like any requirement within the RFP, like any one of the requirements within 2.1, for example, you're okay to say no to it. But the Commonwealth is expressing a preference, and therefore is evaluating that the location of the service desk is one of its evaluation factors. And you'll see that listed within the RFP instructions. And so you may propose a service desk in Southwest Virginia. You may propose one in Virginia elsewhere, but not in Southwest, or you may propose one in some other state. Those are all okay. But we want to know what you're doing. And if you would like to propose, optionally a service desk in Southwest Virginia, you're able to do that. But here, Alejandro, if you would describe on maybe tab 4, I believe it is, we have a section on service desks specifically. Could you give them some guidance about total cost and marginal cost here?
Of course. Like Tim noted, we expressed a preference as to what the side of the service desk would be. What we'd like to understand is what that premium is, or potentially not a premium, but what it is that the difference is financially from having service desk located at our stated preference. And so in this particular tab, supplier should allow us to view what that difference would be. Would the supplier host the service desk elsewhere? So we have two sections here. One is the fixed portion, and one is the variable portion. And it allows the Commonwealth to assess what the premium is for hosting that service desk in our preferred location. This set of charges shouldn't be incremental. The base charges that the supplier lays out in the base charges section of 4.1 should include whatever it is that the supplier is proposing, again, preferably at our preferred location. So those charges should just highlight a subsection of the base charges to allow visibility, but not incremental.
Okay. So now I think we'd like to open it up for Q&A in the next few minutes, and if we need to run a little bit past 3 o'clock, I think that's okay, but we do want to be respectful of people's schedule. You're welcome to submit questions later. We encourage that. Some questions have already been asked via the tool. You can ask it one of two ways. You could submit a question in writing to us, or you can mark your hand as raised. Some questions have already been asked, so I'm going to try and address those quickly, and then we'll get into any future ones. What additional Wave 2, 3 RFPs can a vendor respond to if they respond to the MSI RFP? Well, we said within the, so basically there is maintain kind of distinct separation and kind of lines of control between the MSI and service tower suppliers. And so within the MSI RFP, we've got something specific in the instructions which says if you respond to the MSI RFP, you're not allowed to respond to the server and storage RFP, and we anticipate that the same rule will apply in the Wave 3 RFPs. Now, that is what we anticipate. In other words, the MSI respondent and then ultimately the awardee will not be able to respond to existing Wave 2 RFPs for server and storage, and we expect would not be able to, if they're ultimately awarded, would not be able to respond to voice or end user services. That may adjust a little bit depending on how we scope it later, because those decisions are still being made and will be will be coming in the future. Now, also, and you'll see this in the Q&A, which has been posted publicly. Some have asked about the security RFP, because if we have a separate security RFP, our plan is to not have that particular preclusion, because security sort of sits in the middle between MSI and the other towers. So if the security RFP remains a standalone RFP, we anticipate that anyone, MSI or server providers, can respond to that. But if we do include it within server, then we would establish that preclusion. I hope that makes sense. If you have further questions, I would say submit those ones. I think that a couple of the other questions already raised have been answered, so I'm going to skip over them. The final question I see here from a Deborah is, can you speak to the expectations for the subcontracting plans required by the primes? I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, but basically, as you may be aware, within the Commonwealth of Virginia, there is a preference expressed via scoring factors in the case of VITA for SWAM businesses, but it's also not a mandatory requirement. But in any case, the supplier procurement and subcontract plan must be submitted, whether or not you are including any SWAM businesses within your proposal. But we are expecting a single proposal from any one provider, a single prime on the sort of top of the executive cover sheet, and and any subcontractors indicated within the response. I think that covers the questions that have been asked so far. Go ahead.
Hey Tim, this is Doug Leslie. I just want to point out that the expectation is the push is for small and micro businesses. So really more specifically than SWAM, the governor's executive order has a goal of increasing the use of small and micro businesses. But that's all. That information is readily available, and there's details in the Appendix F.
Are there further questions? And we can open up a line if you want to raise your hand, and we can do it that way as well. Okay, I'm not seeing any more right now. David, who's my colleague helping facilitate this tool, David, do you see any more out there?
No, Jim, we do have 2 more in the question bank.
We have a question.
The
Disk 3. So 1 full unredacted and 1 full redacted proposals. No, we're just looking for, on Disk 3, 1 full complete redacted proposal, because Disks 1 and 2 are the full unredacted proposal.
Okay. There's also a question related to restrictions for subcontractors who may be participating in one RFP being precluded from another RFP. I think we're focused on the primes. So in other words, it's okay to be a subcontractor, but we also ask you to, in the response to talk about the subcontractors, their role, how significant they are, and of course we will consider all of that as part of our evaluation. So, in the event that you're proposing a significant relationship with a particular subcontractor, we'll want to describe how that works. And if that subcontractor was potentially a respondent to other RFPs, we'll probably want to understand better how it maintains its distinct lines of accountability and control. There's a second question which may relate to it if I understand correctly, but from a different person, which says, what are the expectations, signed agreements with the MSI and service providers where there are shared responsibilities? I know you haven't seen the master services agreement yet, but one of the aspects of this model is, and this is described some in Exhibit 1, where we've got operating level agreements. But basically, the suppliers, to a great extent with coordination from the MSI, are required to establish operating level agreements with each other. And you may have done that kind of thing before. It's a fairly common thing to do. Those agreements may describe how you interact at kind of a governance level, how you share tools and that sort of thing. But then at an operational level may have operational level metrics that describe interfaces and handoffs, swim lanes, and timing metrics and the like. We expect those between the tower providers and between the tower providers and the MSI. And we require that within the agreement to the Commonwealth, which means that the OLAs between providers become part of your obligation to the Commonwealth. That is, that you will honor those OLAs. So that's a way in which the model establishes integration and accountability between providers. Are there any more questions?
Hey, this is Doug Leslie. I just want to make a couple of points, general points here. First one being reiterating, you can see on the screen, on the single point of contact. We will do our best to respond as quickly as possible to any questions we get in writing. And second request I would have is to, when you submit your proposal, if you could avoid providing a lot of canned sales material and stick to your specific solution for the Commonwealth, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, and the other comment is like it. When you submit questions, realize that we want to and need to make all providers aware of the same information. And so if you ask a question about how an aspect of the process works or some requirement within the RFP, we will post that question and its response to all providers publicly. And so therefore, you would not want to include your name within the body of the question or that sort of thing, because we will hide your name, but we will post the question. And we don't want to try and edit your question. So we don't even often fix grammar or things like that. So try to avoid using your name within the body of the questions or anything specific to your proposal. You've asked about size. We've got another question that's just come in regarding size limits for responses. In general, there aren't very many size limits, but some of the documents, particularly like the solution documents, do have limits indicated within them. So I would just say, for example, if you look at the implementation plan, there's a limit, I believe, within the instructions at the head of that document. So look there. If you don't see it or you're not sure, please ask about the document specifically. Because we're not, they're not email responses. We don't have a a megabyte size limitation either. Of course, as Doug indicated, we want to avoid any kind of extra marketing fluff. We really want to dive into the meat of your proposal. We also want to know exactly what you will do within your price, not just the things that you can do or are capable of. Many of you are capable of all kinds of things, but we want to know your actual proposal for the Commonwealth. I've got this follow-up question regarding attachments, and you know, David, you may need to clarify this question because I'm not totally sure. The various attachments, so to speak, that we have included to the RFP that are indicated as a template you should submit back. If for some reason you have a file that you need to attach yourself, like for example, you want to, I don't know, provide an example operating level agreement, or there needs to be some attachment in your format to further describe an aspect of your solution, I think that would be okay, but we want to keep that limited to the extent we can. We think we've provided space throughout all of our templates, the solution documents, the pricing forms, etc., for you to provide everything that you would need. And extra documents become a little harder for us to address, only because you know, we'll be dealing with a variety of responses and documents. So we'd encourage you to keep them within our templates, but if you do need, for whatever reason, submit an attachment, you won't be kind of turned away for that.
Yep, I think in the interest of time here, we should probably wrap things up.
Yep, and I'm sure we could go on for a while answering questions. There is one more that gets into requirements for, you know, resources and location and that sort of thing. I would say that that's more fully described within Exhibit 5. We also wanted to use this time to talk about mostly about the process, the procurement process, and not so much get into solution-related requirements. And so we will probably need to cut it off here, just in out of respect to everyone's time. Please do submit questions to Doug via email. We've got a process internally to try and address them as quickly as we can. So we will respond to you. If there, Doug, are there any further closing remarks from your end, or shall we wrap?
I don't think so, other than to say, if you had a question we can get to, like Tim said, just email it to me. We'll get back to you. We do have a couple that came in through the webinar system, but if you would be so kind as to, and we'll make a note of those, but please resubmit those via email to me, if you would. And again, we'll post the answers. Other than that, I guess I would just like to thank everybody for their time and thank everybody in advance for you know, making the effort, bringing the resources to respond to the RFP, and we really appreciate it. We will try to be responsive to you as well throughout the process, and thank you very much for your participation generally.
Thank you all. Have a good afternoon. We'll announce this posting link on Evo when it's available, and continue watching there for RFP Q&A and updates. Good afternoon.
That's right.
Bye.
Thank you very much.